The world's predators come in a vast array of shapes and sizes and use a diverse range of techniques to capture their prey. Some use ambush, some rely on overwhelming speed, others on stamina, driving their prey to exhaustion through dogged, unrelenting pursuit. To achieve this, they may use legs, flippers, or wings. But almost all predators rely heavily on the one common piece of kit when it comes to actually killing their prey, their jaws. And as a general rule, the bigger the bite, the bigger the prey. So figuring the bite force that a predator can generate gives us real insight into its position in the food web. Most of the world's biggest biters are now extinct, and even for living species, getting direct measurements of bite force can be difficult, not to mention damn dangerous. But over the last few decades, scientists, including myself, have developed alternative methods with which to predict bite force in a wide range of gigantic predators. So, now that the numbers are in, we can finally present the all-time big biters league table and reveal which species had the biggest bite ever. If you'd like to find out, keep watching. Hi, I'm Professor Steve Wroe. I'm a real paleontologist, and you're watching Real Paleontology. And today, we're talking bite force. I'm going to run through the 10 biggest biters of all time. Here are the contenders. They're in no particular order. Number 1, Kronosaurus queenslandicus, a very big Cretaceous pliosaur. Number 2, Megalodon, the gigantic late tertiary shark. Number 3, Tyrannosaurus rex, a Cretaceous theropod that really needs no introduction. Number 4, Agriotherium africanum, a very big Pliocene bear from Africa. Number 5, Basilosaurus isis, a big toothy Eocene whale. Number 6, Crocodylus porossus, the world's largest living reptile. Number 7, Deinosuchus riograndensis, an even bigger Cretaceous crocodilian. Number 8, Leviathan melvillei, a big, even more toothy late tertiary whale. Number 9, Pliosaurus kevini, another whopping big pliosaur, this one from the late Jurassic of the UK. And last but not least, at number 10 here, we have the oldest of our contenders and terror of the late Devonian seas, the giant armoured fish, Dunkleosteus terrelli. Now, before we work through this list of big biters and give you the numbers, we need to get our heads around the basics of quantifying bite force. There are 4 commonly used techniques. The first is to stick a transducer into the animal's jaws and get it to bite. There are some pros and cons here. The big pro is that you have an actual real life reading from a real live animal. But there are a bunch of cons. The most obvious is that you have to have a real live animal, and that's a problem when the animal you want a bite force reading for is dead. In short, it's completely useless for fossil species. Another problem is that you can't be sure that the living specimen you're using is biting as hard as it could. It may be using 100% of available power, but it's very likely that it's not. Maybe it's using 99%, maybe it's just using 10%. There's no way of knowing. The third approach is one developed by Jeff Thomason in 1991 here, called the dry skull method. I've used Jeff's approach in a number of papers, the first of which Jeff was actually a co-author on, Bite Club, back in 2005. Here we predicted bite force for a bunch of carnivores and showed that predators with relatively high bite forces tended to prey on relatively big animals. I've described this process in previous episodes, so I'll just quickly reiterate here. Fundamental to the dry skull method is the fact that there is a direct relationship between the maximum cross-sectional area of a muscle and the maximum force that it can generate. So, if you can measure the maximum cross-sectional area of the muscles used in biting, then you have a pretty reliable estimate of the maximum forces involved. Now, there are two main muscles used by mammals in biting, the temporalis and masseter. For both, the maximum cross-sectional area is pretty tightly constrained by the aperture between the cheekbone and the rest of the skull. Determining the maximum cross-sectional areas for these muscles, then, is basically a colouring in project. So once we have these areas, we have the maximum muscle forces. Now, jaws are levers. They have a pivot point or fulcrum, which is where the lower jaw and upper jaw articulate. They have an in lever, which is where the muscles attach and where the force is applied. And they have an out lever, which is effectively the position along the jaw of the teeth for which we want to predict the bite forces. Now we have identified the fulcrum, measured the lengths of the in lever and out lever, and calculated the forces. It's just a matter of plugging these numbers into a pretty simple equation, and hey presto, out pops a predicted bite force. An obvious advantage of this method is that it can be applied to extinct species. Even for living species, it's a whole lot quicker, easier, and safer than running around the globe trying to stick transducers into the mouths of big carnivores and making them angry enough to bite. You also don't have to worry about whether the animal is biting as hard as it could. But of course, there are cons here too. The dry skull method is based on 2D physics, whereas skulls, of course, are 3D objects. It's been shown that this approach typically underestimates maximum bite forces, although, at least between more closely related species, it still gives us a pretty good idea of bite forces in relative terms, and for most studies, this is what's important. Another method I've used quite a lot over the years is finite element analysis. This is a 3D computer-based approach using 3D models and a more realistic arrangement of the muscles. As you can see in these models from a paper on saber-tooths by myself and colleagues published back in 2013, this approach usually yields a higher bite force prediction. Lastly, we have another 3D computer-based approach called multi-body dynamics. Bates and Falkingham here used this to predict bite force in T-Rex back in 2012. I've not used this approach myself, and I'm not aware of any studies that have compared results between this and any other. However, I would be surprised if its accuracy was not at least comparable with those obtained using finite element analysis. Okay, so let's get into it and work through the list. First up, we have our Australian contender, Kronosaurus queenslandicus. This was a big animal by any standard, up to around 10 metres or 33 feet in length, and its skull was huge, maybe exceeding 2 metres. Its bite force was estimated at up to 27,000 newtons by Colin McHenry back in 2009. I know Colin well, and I know the effort and diligence that he put into this work because I was one of his PhD supervisors on this task. We've worked together on a number of papers since. Anyway, there's no doubt that Colin remains the expert on this species, and sooner or later we'll do an episode on this awesome beast. Next up, we have Megalodon. Its maximum bite force has been estimated at up to 182,000 newtons. I've got a pretty good idea of how this figure was arrived at because I calculated it for this paper we published back in 2008, How Hard Can a Great White Bite? Here we built a 3D computer model of a great white shark's head from a CT scan, reconstructed the muscles, and applied finite element analysis to get its bite force. Assuming that Megalodon could grow to the maximum body mass that had been previously predicted for it, which was 109,000 kilograms, we then applied a scaling rule, which assumed that the big fish maintained the same proportions as a great white shark, just a whole lot bigger. Anyway, since 2008, there's been a lot of debate over the dimensions of Megalodon, and I've played a small role in this, most recently in this 2022 study led by Jack Cooper. Jack derived a total length of around 16 metres and a maximum body mass of 63 metric tonnes, for the only specimen in the world of Megalodon that has anything like a complete vertebral column, which is around 11 metres long. And I need to really emphasize here that there's not a single skull known for the giant shark. The one you can see here is just a scaled up version of the great white shark model I produced for my 2008 paper. Most recently, Kenshu Shimada and friends have argued that Megalodon was a way skinnier fish and concluded that this same Belgian specimen weighed in at a paltry 30,000 kilograms. However, they further speculated that this species may have grown to 24 metres and weighed 94,000 kilograms. But this is extrapolation based on a single backbone found in Denmark. Consequently, these maximum dimensions are highly speculative, and it seems that about all we can say with even a modicum of certainty is that Megalodon grew to lengths well above 11 metres and weights above either 30,000 or 63,000 kilograms, depending on whose reconstructions you find most compelling. At 63,000 kilograms, and assuming that its proportions were very similar to those of a great white shark, Megalodon could have generated around 125,000 newtons of bite force. If Kenshu Shimada is right, and Megalodon had a very different shape to that of the great white shark, then I'm not going to speculate further other than to say that its maximum bite force was well below 125,000 newtons. Next on our list is the king, Tyrannosaurus rex. Now, bite force for T. rex has been estimated using both the indentation/reverse engineering approach I mentioned earlier by Erickson and colleagues, and also using multi-body dynamics by Bates and Falkingham here in 2009. Erickson calculated a maximum of 13,400 newtons, but for reasons explained earlier, this is very unlikely to be a real maximum. Bates and Falkingham give an absolute maximum of 57,000 newtons, and given that this work was based on an actual skull and three-dimensional modelling, I reckon it's probably pretty close to the mark, at least in a relative sense compared to our other contenders. On to number 4, the very big short-faced bear, Agriotherium africanum. Chris Oldfield, then a student of mine, and Phil Clawson's, published a bite force estimate for this beast back in 2011 using finite element analysis. Our prediction was close to 4,600 newtons for a bite at the canine teeth. Couple of things to point out here. Firstly, this figure is, as I said, for a bite at the front of the jaw. A bite at the back of the tooth row would have been considerably higher because of the higher leverage, at least 1.5 times higher, which would give a figure closer to 7,000 newtons. I also note that although this bear was very big, it was definitely not the biggest. This title goes to the South American giant Arctotherium angustidens, and it's very likely, if not certain, that it had a considerably bigger bite still. Okay, next up we have Basilosaurus isis, the awesome, ancient, very toothy Eocene whale. With a skull around 2 metres in length, this beast has a well-deserved place in the bite force big league. In 2015, Eric Snively and friends published a maximum bite force estimate for this species exceeding 20,000 newtons, based on 3D finite element analysis. At the time, it was certainly the highest predicted for any mammal, aquatic or terrestrial. It's a very interesting beast, and sooner or later I'll devote a whole episode to it. As you can see here, it was an unusual shape relative to living whales, long, skinny, almost eel-like. So, although it could grow to 18 metres in length, maximum weight estimates are as low as 6.5 metric tonnes. This is well below the 10 tonnes recorded for the biggest known orca, which was half its length. Just as a quick aside, we have pretty convincing evidence that Basilosaurus was a card-carrying superpredator, as the remains of another toothy whale, Durodon, have been found in its guts, as reported by Voss and friends here in 2019. Next, Crocodylus porosus, the saltwater croc, and as an Aussie, I take pride in the fact that this big Australasian is the only living species to make it to the qualifying round. As I said at the top, the actual bite force for this species was recorded using a transducer at 16,400 newtons. But of course, this was not the biggest ever saltwater crocodile. In 2012, Erickson and friends extrapolated on data from a wide range of living crocodilians to provide an estimate for the biggest known individual salty, which was 6.7 metres long. Their maximum bite force prediction, 34,400 newtons. Quite a bite. But not as big as the next cab off the rank, the giant Cretaceous croc, Deinosuchus reograndensis. This monster may have reached up to 12 metres in length and weighed in at as much as 8 tonnes. Based on extrapolation again, Erickson and Friends 2012 derived an estimate of 103,000 newtons of bite force. And that really is a lot. Up we have another whale, and what a whale it was. Leviathan melvillei, at up to nearly 18 metres in length and as much as 57,000 kilograms in weight, this was a big whale by any standard. But what really stands out is the size of its enormous head and teeth. Its skull was 3 metres long and it housed the biggest teeth ever, some over 36 centimetres or 1.2 feet in length. There can be absolutely no doubt that this was a very big biter, as the authors of the paper first describing it clearly recognised in their 2012 study entitled The Giant Bite of a New Raptorial Sperm Whale from the Miocene Epoch of Peru. What then is its predicted bite force, I hear you ask? Well, the short answer is there isn't one. So, I'm going to fix this for you. Obviously, at this point, there are no direct estimates based on 2D or 3D reconstructions of its skull. However, there are estimates for a smaller, closely related species that are based on three-dimensional finite element analysis. Another big-toothed but considerably smaller macroraptorial sperm whale called Zygophyceta. In 2021, Emmanuel Perry and friends calculated a maximum bite force of 10,100 newtons for this guy, and in 2006, Giovanni Bianchi estimated that the animal weighed in at around 6,500 kilograms. So, if we assume that Leviathan had the same proportions as Zygophyceta and apply the same formula I used to predict bite force in Megalodon based on data from a white shark, then a 57,000 kilogram Leviathan would have had a bite force of 44,000 newtons. However, unlike the situation with Megalodon, in this instance, we know for sure that Leviathan had a skull with very different proportions to those of the animal we are using for scale. As you can see here, Leviathan's skull is far more robust than Zygophyceta's. And as noted by Xiong and colleagues just last year, the huge area for attachment of its jaw-closing temporalis muscles was relatively greater than in any other whale species. In short, this means that our estimate of 44,000 newtons is likely a major underestimate. We're getting to the end of our list of contenders here with another big pliosaur, Pliosaurus kevini. At 2 metres in length, its skull was slightly longer than that of our made in Australia Kronosaurus. In 2014, David Foffer and friends predicted the bite of this big British pliosaur using 3D finite element analysis. They came up with a range of between 28,000 and 48,000 newtons. Now, obviously, 48,000 newtons is much higher than the figure of 27,000 newtons that Colin McHenry predicted for Kronosaurus. However, there's a simple explanation for this. The 48,000 newton figure arrived at by Foffer allows for an additional variable. That is, it attempts to correct for a force multiplier called muscle pennation. Now, I'm not going to go into this in any detail, but pennation effectively increases the cross-sectional area of the muscles involved, and it can make a big difference. Accounting for this can give a more accurate prediction. On the other hand, it amounts to yet another variable that we have to estimate, more assumptions. I'm not going to argue that either approach is superior here. What's important is that we understand the methods used so that we know we're comparing apples to apples. So, knowing this, we can see that there really is very little difference between Kronosaurus and Pliosaurus. That is, a bite force of 27,000 newtons versus 28,000. All right, last but not least, we have the terror of the Devonian seas, Dunkleosteus. Back in 2006, Philip Anderson and Mark Westneat predicted a maximum bite force of 5,300 newtons for this truly terrifying ancient fish. Now, as I'm sure many of you are aware, this fish just done got itself seriously shrunk in 2023 by Russell Engelman here. And I mean like halved in length from a maximum of 10 metres to 5 metres. The good news is that this has absolutely no effect on the predicted bite force. This is because the bite force was solely determined on the basis of its well-preserved skull. So, the results are all in and we can announce the winners. But first, if you've enjoyed this episode, can I ask that you please like and subscribe? It's been fun for me, but a hell of a lot of work. And I've got no team of editors, scriptwriters, and photographers for my little channel. You might even consider donating a few bucks through the Super Thanks function. It's easy to do, and I sure could do with a better microphone setup. Anyway, here are our contenders, listed from biggest maximum bite force to smallest. Taken at face value, the clear winner is Megalodon. That said, it is also one of the 4 predictions that we should have the least confidence in. The others being the predictions for Leviathan, Deinosuchus, and the 6.7 metre saltwater crocodile. The main reason for this is because each of these 4 are based solely on extrapolation from much smaller individuals. And this assumes that their skulls and muscle anatomy remain proportionately the same as they get bigger. So for Megalodon, we have no skull at all. And for Leviathan, we have a skull, but no one has yet used it to get a more accurate estimate. My prediction here for the big toothy whale assumed that its skull was proportionately the same as those of a much smaller, far less robust species of sperm whale. As I said, the figure of 44,000 newtons is very likely a major underestimate. To really get things in context, here is a figure to scale with a 1.8 metre tall dude and the skulls of the top biters, excluding Megalodon. It is absolutely clear, to me at least, that Leviathan must be in a league of its own relative to these 3. There is just no way that any of these contenders could come close in terms of maximum bite force. In my opinion, the only thing that could possibly have exceeded it is Megalodon, which is, of course, the only species we've looked at for which we do not have a skull. But let's say we did. Assuming its skull was basically the same shape as that of a white shark, then a 16-metre long Megalodon would have had a skull about 2.7 metres long, slightly smaller than that of Leviathan. If it grew to 20 metres in length, its skull would have been around 3.4 metres long. But to me, there is just so much uncertainty here, so many ifs. And even if Megalodon did grow to be 20 metres or more in length, its jaw-closing muscles, like those of all sharks, had parallel muscle fibres, not pinnate, whereas Leviathan surely did have pinnate jaw-closing muscles, meaning that all else being equal, it could have developed considerably more bite force. So here's my call on this. If I were a betting man, I'd put my money on Leviathan being the hardest biter of all time, followed by Megalodon and then Deinosuchus. But the reality is, I don't think we will have a satisfactory resolution to this question until we have bite force predictions based on 3D computer modelling for both Leviathan and Megalodon. Regarding Leviathan, I'm in no doubt Sooner or later this will be done. We have the material. Unfortunately, though, we may never be able to do this for Megalodon. Simple fact is, it's incredibly rare for the skull of a shark to be fossilized because the shark's skeleton is entirely composed of soft, squishy cartilage. Okay, folks, I'll wind it up here. Hope you enjoyed the show, and I'll be back next week. Hopefully, see you then.